Welcome everyone. I'm Fred Balford. I'm Director of Science Gallery Rotterdam. I've been very much looking forward to this opportunity to go in depth with some of the researchers and artists who have been contributing to our show. The first one actually of Science Gallery Rotterdam, Unreal. So I propose that we first introduce ourselves, making a round. Yannick, could you start?
Yes, thank you. My name is Yannick Nossin. I'm a PhD student with the Erasmus Medical Center. I'm working on cartilage and bone tissue engineering, and specifically I'm interested into how cells communicate with each other with a secret home. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity to work together with an artist, Amy, on this project. Yeah.
Thanks. Enrique.
Yeah, actually I'm a colleague with Yannick. We are also both PhD students, also here at the Erasmus MC. And yeah, well, my focus is much more specific in bone tissue engineering. So in the tissue repair group, we're trying to make eventually, by the use of stem cells and with these new technologies, we're trying to bring this idea of growing bones in the lab. So yeah, there's still a lot of things to do there then.
Sounds exciting. Amy, could you shortly introduce yourself? You're calling from San Francisco, USA. Welcome, of course, to the Netherlands virtually.
Hi, my name is Amy Karle. I am an artist based in San Francisco. I study what it means to be human, especially at this time of humans and technology coming together. So a lot of my work involves biotechnologies because these are really compromising or questioning what it means to be natural and what nature really is when we start modifying or playing with nature in this way. So working with this group is a great fit. I've actually also worked with a little bit of bone and tissue engineering and tissue culture as well. So I'm very inspired by the work done there, and I'm happy to work with this team.
Roberto.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roberto Narcisi. I'm assistant professor at the Erasmus Medical Center in the orthopedics department. I'm a biotechnologist by training, and I work on stem cells for disease modeling or for regenerative medicine purposes, with the main goal to understand a bit more how all the cells and the tissue in our body function, and eventually to bring some new technologies and some new cure for the patients.
Yes, thank you, Roberto. Yeah, first of all, I think it's fascinating that we are calling in from different parts of the world, also with researchers from different parts of the world, and somehow science and art already is a language that we all speak and that we can understand each other in. So I think that's a very fascinating idea. So would you all please explain why you have chosen to be an artist or scientist, and how you see the role of creativity in this process?
I chose to be an artist because I feel like since I was young, art is the language that I communicate with others the best. It's the way that I can tell a story and communicate all of these different thoughts and emotions, whether they're personal stories that relate to others about the human condition to very technical aspects that I can create something visually and, you know, as a piece of artwork that can communicate that in just a few seconds. So that's why I am an artist. That's a language that I speak best. I work with the human body and question what it means to be human because this is our way of knowing our world. And to me, the human body is the greatest piece of art and science all wrapped into one. It's endlessly fascinating. There's so much to learn about it. And then when we get into the science of mind and the human condition, you know, we spend lifetimes looking at this work, looking at what this is and questioning this, and there's so many unanswered questions. So this is where my fascination lies, and I look at how we are merging with technology, because the point that we're at in humanity is humans and technology coming together. When we look at how much we use our phone in one day and how that's reshaped our thought processes, we could really see that, how now we value short bursts of information because we're so used to texting. But it also impacts us in everything we do, from, you know, the food that we eat to the medicines that we take. And we have actually physically internalized this technology as well. But there's this beautiful side of it, that when we see somebody, for example, with a pacemaker in front of us, we don't see somebody who is a cyborg. We see someone whose life has been saved. This is the specific kind of area that I look at with my artwork and that I question. And I use those technologies in that process. My creativity and the new ideas come from working through the process. So when I'm working with these tools and technologies, I learn so much. When I work with scientists in the lab, I get new ideas. When I work with technology, they make new different kinds of artifacts or aesthetics. You know, when you 3D print, that's a certain kind of look. When you use a laser cutter, that's a certain kind of look. And so working through the process is when I get my inspiration and get new ideas, whether they're technical or aesthetic. Also, having these kinds of conversations brings up a lot of different philosophical questions in the process too. Like, if we're going to use live human cells, what does that mean about the piece? What if I can use my own cells or somebody's cells who's passed away? What does that mean about what it means to be alive? Because that is not the same as having that person in front of us.
Roberto, why have you chosen to be a researcher, and when did you do that? Why not a doctor or an artist? And what is the role of creativity in your work?
So personally, what is fascinating me the most in my work as a scientist is the beauty of discovering new things. So be the first one to look at the certain event, for example, inside the cell. The beauty of, in a way, working at the edge of knowledge, of what is known and what is unknown. In a way, if I can describe it, is a bit like, yeah, the beauty of seeing the scientific method working, which, by the way, is telling that you are wrong most of the time, but is part of the game. Because, yeah, make mistakes is human, but not learning from them is actually the real mistake. And the scientific methods is based on, for me, two basic questions, which are also part of the creativity that I see in my work. Because for me, creativity is tightly connected to the question, how does it work and why? And I have the tendency never take things from granted, and you have to ask my wife how much annoying I am sometimes because of that. But asking these two questions is the engine for me of having new ideas. And I have to say that normally happens when I don't think about science. I'm a runner, and often I have this boost, and I start to think about the why and how does it work, certain kind of things that I just noticed, for example, in the lab, when I'm doing something completely different, like a run outside. And for a scientist, creativity is probably the path that is taking you from asking this initial question to have a solution. And every one of us as a scientist are using the same methods, which is the scientific methods, but how this method is applied is quite personal. And every scientist has his own style in going through these paths, like I think for the artists, that they have their own styles in doing what they do.
Thanks. Very nice comparison, I think. Enrique, what is your drive to be a researcher?
Yeah, so yeah, actually this is kind of a pretty philosophical thing with a lot of thoughts. I mean, I would say if we go to the basics of humans, At the end, one of the things that would bring us most joy when we were kids, at the end, is to play and to try to understand how the world works. In fact, I'd say that my biggest fear in life will be to get bored, actually. And at the end, yeah, it's like this constant trying to get new stimulus, new ways of also understanding what is my own place in the world. And actually, that's something that also science helps me try to understand. Because at the end, personally, science sits like a game. So because it's really getting to the edge of the knowledge, there's not written what is after. So actually, it brings a big joy being able to be there to experiment and then trying to find what is there, because again, nothing is written. You can be correct or not. And at the end, I'd say even that finding something completely new is not actually what would even bring me the most joy, but the fact of being there, performing these experiments, making these questions, and then trying again. I'd say that once something is discovered, yeah, what more joy? At the end, it's the path, what brings you happiness, not reaching the end. And yeah, at the end, that's also how I try to take science, because most of it is failure. So at the end, I really do it just for itself, for the fact of experimenting and playing with it. And of course, eventually, every new thing I could get, at the end, there will be something good, would be some good advancement that actually eventually will help somebody else. So yeah, that's my main motivation, actually.
Thank you. Thanks. Yannick, how about you? Why are you in science?
Yeah, for me, it's more like a constant curiosity that drove me into science. That at some point in school, I realized that, yeah, processes in the human body fell together like pieces of a clock that just clicked into each other. And I was like, okay, if this is the case, how does it look if you go a level deeper and a level deeper? And that's more or less how I ended up in, well, tissue engineering and utilizing cells to build new tissues up again. And how creativity falls into this for me is more, yeah, my motivation in this way is more of a problem solving kind of way. I have my tools in front of me that I can choose different ones of to fix a certain problem, and applying them differently or seeing how they could fit together to form a way towards this results is where I also find my fun, my joy in this whole, where then if this whole works out, great, I have a result. But if the one thing I get out of it, that my method worked and I'm not getting the result that I want, also fine, my method worked. That is one of my joys that I can get out of.
A question to the researchers. You're a research group, so what is it exactly that brought you together?
So yeah, actually, it's interesting because, we have now a German, an Italian, and Spaniard. We just ended up here in the Netherlands. But yeah, it's pretty interesting how, some European project also at the end, and different things, at the end tends to get everybody from around and just puts everybody in common, trying actually to get some common goal. So I guess we more or less start because we have some desire of knowledge of the same topic. In our case, it's mostly the bone. But yeah, I guess also the idea of working with people from everywhere with different mentalities, different ideas, following the same goal. Yeah, I think that's mostly what brought us together to do these things.
Okay, so you clearly share a fascination. Amy, how is that for you? Your introduction to the research of Erasmus MC and the researchers who are here is clearly new. How did you get introduced into it, and how do you like it?
Well, I was introduced through Science Gallery Rotterdam and Unreal. The curator, William Myers, saw some of my work at the Center Pompidou that I did with bone and regenerative medicine and thought we would be a good fit. And as soon as we started talking, I feel like we just hit it off. We've only been able to meet virtually. I hope that someday we can meet in person, but when we had our conversations, it was just very natural. And we share a lot of the similar interests. And the more that we talk, the more that we find that even though we're working across different disciplines, we actually work in similar ways. and the sources of our creativity are kind of generated in the same way as well. So that's been really exciting too, to see the commonalities that we all share and the mutual interests.
Thanks. And you also told us that you are working with bone in your work. Do you also see similarities there? Is it really recognizable for you?
Yeah, definitely. I am not a scientist by training. I'm an artist and philosopher. So to learn from these guys is just really inspiring for me to, you know, be able to talk with the experts is great. We actually haven't gotten into too much of the technical stuff, but I do feel like I have a team now, and I do have some questions about like, oh, what's going on with these MSCs that I could email you guys, and I know that you'd be a great resource. So. So technically, yeah, the little that we did cover is very, very similar.
Well, it is interesting to see how fluid disciplines are. I mean, 3D printing, which is quite a new technique, is something that is being used in art and design, but as I understand it well, also in biotechnology. Roberto, is that so? Is it something that is useful for you as a researcher or even in clinical fields?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3D printing and nowadays even 4D printings is one of the fundamental tools that we have in regenerative medicine, for example, which is one of the field that we have in common with Enrique and Yannick, taken from different perspectives, of course.
Could you shortly explain 4D printing?
Yeah, 4D printing is a kind of an implementation of the 3D printing technology, which is made by 3D printing a certain object that is able to respond to stimuli over time. So that is able to change over time. For example, by changing a shape or changing structure in response to certain kind of stimuli in a second phase of the generation. One of the most fascinating things that I got to know recently is the Origami technique, which is 4D base, and we have here in the Netherlands expert on these technologies. Yeah, it's really something very interesting, because you are able to 3D print in a flat surface a certain kind of object that can become, for example, a bioscaffold to regenerate a tissue. And then when this structure feels a certain kind of component or fluid or liquid or stimuli, is able to fold in a 3D structure over time with a certain rate, with a certain mechanism. And you can fine-tune the way in which you build this kind of structure to predict in a very accurate way how it's going to fold, and according to your needs. It's really interesting.
I think this is an important point to talk about where our interests overlap here, that I'm really well known for 3D printing and mention Regenerative Reliquary. That's the piece that I mentioned earlier, but I didn't get into it. Regenerative Reliquary is a piece of mine that is 3D printed in a peg to hydrogel material for stem cell culture into bone growth. And maybe the team can pipe up here of describing a little bit about why 3D printing is so important to this field. Because if you think about like old school pipetting, right? This is like laying down an area over time, like dot, 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 dot. Well, a machine with 3D printing can do that with so much more accuracy, exactly like on the microscopic level, and be able to put those layers down over and over and over. And in the body, when we think about how our cells work and how our tissues work, this is in the third dimension. This is in 3D. This isn't happening flat in a petri dish. So there's all these other forces that are put upon our bodies, and especially when you think about bones, tissue, and cartilage, this does not happen flat. So this is another way that 3D printing is so important to this field.
Thanks. I think your works, which are in the exhibition now in Unreal, are really great to see, and some of the most beautiful pieces that we have here. So we're glad that they made it to Rotterdam. Could you describe what we see?
The pieces that are at
Go ahead.
Science Gallery Rotterdam is a collection of 6 sculptures. The title is Morphologies of Resurrection. So all of my work, I have to collaborate with scientists, technologists, different museums, different institutions. This piece started as a collaboration with the Smithsonian. They asked me to do some work with some of their 3D scan data, and they gave me a Triceratops file. And I was like, I don't know what to do with a dinosaur. So I really started leaning into this idea of looking at the bone structure, because that's what we have left of a skeleton, and saying, what could we learn if we model that structure? What could we learn about how this animal moved? What can we learn about the way that their muscles moved? And I was thinking about this concept of deep time. So going way back in the past, when you look at rock formations and see all those strata, that's the concept of deep time. So I was thinking about dinosaurs in that respect, and then moving that much forward into the future as well, and thinking, what if we could actually use what we learned from this species and create morphologies of it in the future? I was using generative programs so that I can kind of fine tune a machine learning mechanism to stop at different points to say, oh, we can extract some data that we knew from the past, really far in the past, and project it into the future. So on the scale of something that is real to unreal, this is very on the unreal spectrum. But there's some other things that I was thinking about in this process too. I was thinking about the idea of regenerative medicine. And when we think about regenerative medicine, we tend to think of like different implants that we can make. And we're on this cusp of being able to possibly reshape our bodies, and we're even already seeing how we've reshaped the environment from our use of biotechnologies. So I was thinking about that aspect of it as well. And on the scale of unreal to real, that's somewhere that in the middle that we really have to think about consciously, because we are on this spectrum right now. So I also presented this work as both scientific specimens, as something that we're thinking about in the scientific field, but also as precious objects, because we have to have a high regard when we're approaching these concepts, that we can't just play with them lightly. As artwork, I'm stopping at different points and showing how these could possibly evolve, but we can't stop this if we do integrate it in real life into our bodies. If we resurrect different species, which actually seems unreal, but scientists are working with right now. If we play with our biotechnologies this way, with like de-evolution and bringing back extinct species, even if it's with the goal to help us learn more about where we are or for medical purposes, these are changes that we couldn't undo. So we have to be very conscious and aware about them.
That's great. And Roberto, how was it for you as a researcher to see Amy's work?
I really enjoy to participate to this science gallery and work with Amy for different reasons, actually. Because I think that art can support in general science in different ways. And because I think that somehow we have something in common, which is creativity. And it's really nice to see how we can use creativity in different ways, but on the other hand, how many things we still have in common. Art, I think that has the great power of attracting people to a particular topic. And if the topic is science, I think that it has the advantage of increasing this awareness around the science that we really, really need in this moment of time. Knowing how science works and having more and more people that will become scientifically literate in the future, I think that is one of the things that we have to proceed, because science has time, science make mistakes, science often work by discarding possibilities rather than prove something 100% right. And the more people are aware of this process, are aware about, for example, how the scientific methods works, the better is for our civilization, I guess.
Thanks. Yannick or Enrique, you like to add something to this regarding Amy's work as well?
For me, it was quite nice to first being introduced to Amy and her works, and in a way, it was nice to see because she challenged a lot of perception that I, as a scientist, have. In a way, as close as we work with human materials, with cells we get out of patient materials, in the end, the discussion about how this influences a human being when in the future, because we're far from this yet, but how that would influence a person when implanted, or these kinds of discussion usually don't come up in our daily life. And it was really, breathe of fresh air in a way to see, okay, there is somebody interested in this. How can we explain this? How can we get this more approachable? And that was really, really nice. I enjoyed it quite a lot.
Yeah, Amy's work, it's also like very nice in the sense that it tries to transmit these ideas that people have to start self-thinking. What's going on there? So it's true that, well, we scientists, we tend to be also pretty methodical, and we also try not to say something that we're not also completely sure. But it's also necessary to make people dream. And this actually is linked to all the concepts of creativity, which I really think that if people don't start dreaming, like, well, could this be a possibility? Would this be possible? Then anything advances. Making people and all society participate into these questions and into these thoughts, I think is fundamental. Also to attract more people to science and attract more people to art. So I think in general, all these things are completely necessary, and these well-done interactions between science and art. Yeah.
The science and the art also sometimes technically really affect one another. So with the regenerative reliquary piece, that bright yellow color was directly a necessity of the requirements of the cells to have B vitamin in it. So and also for the 3D printing for various purposes. So I would have not necessarily chose this made a really powerful aesthetic choice of this bright neon yellow if it wasn't for the requirements that were needed for technically creating the work. Likewise, the art positively impacted the science because to date, this is the largest known 3D printed scaffold for stem cell culture, because I wanted something that was uniquely recognizable as human. And if we look at all the bones in our body, a skull and hands are the most recognizable as being human. So because I wanted something that was human size, human scale of a hand, that made us actually drive the technology and the 3D printing process forward. It made us drive the formulations of the material science forward because we had to have something that would print over a long period of time without timing out, without the materials evaporating. So we had to make new formulas in that process. And so not only was the art driven forward by the science, but the science was also moved forward by the art as well. And to me as an artist, this is when I feel like my work is extra valuable, when it can make both an impact on society as a piece of artwork, and then also continue to inform these other disciplines that were necessary in the process of making the work.
If you look at the possibilities of this basic research and creative art in the future over the long run, could you imagine joint projects actually in which researchers and artists are working very close together towards applications?
Yeah, I can envision a factory of the future where all different kinds of things are made from the basis of a few stem cells, and the stem cells will proliferate and grow. And I think the team can actually speak to more about how this could happen technically. But I see that artists and scientists are fundamental to work together, designers as well, philosophers for the ethics issue. The more that we work together, the more that we come out of our silos. And this is where innovation really occurs, when we start to all have this single-minded focus on a topic and we're contributing our own unique perspectives. This is another reason that I've really loved our conversations with these guys, because we find I felt like we found that we're trying to kind of get to the same place, or we work in very similar ways, even though we identify differently and we kind of speak different languages as artists and scientists. Big picture, we're asking a lot of the same questions, and we integrate the importance of play into all that we do. So when we can play together, it's a much more interesting game.
Roberto, could you imagine having an artist in your team?
So if you think, what are the senses that make you remember the most a certain kind of concept? It's not really what you read or what you hear, but is more what you feel, is more what you taste, is more what you can perceive with different kind of senses. So I think that in a way, the future of science can have an artist in the team in a way to better represent certain kind of data. I made the example one time with Amy. I see the future in which we can go through the data in a way that we can feel and taste the data.
I would like to go back to the topic of the exhibition, Unreal. It is about how science and art actually change our perception of what is real and what is not. Could you elaborate on that, on what is actually nature, how can we change it, and is it still nature when we have changed it, and should we?
I had a moment where I went through this of how much human or how real is this when I first collected my samples from an operation room and extracted cells out of it. And that step, I thought, okay, I got the cells. These are still from a human. I put a protein to these cells to influence them, to get them to do something. This protein was synthesized the same way they were synthesized in a human. The reaction was what we would expect in a human. And in a way, then thinking further, if we put this back into a human, does this, or even in the same person we got these cells from, how does that then influence this person? How would they feel about this? Was one of the questions that Amy approached us with, and that really stuck with me for a bit. And I thought, yeah, well, in the end, this is all still natural. This is all still the same part of this person. And where an ethical concern maybe comes then to fruition, especially when we talk stem cells, if we talk genetic modification, is one of the points that Amy brought up before, that if there is a point of no return, if we take this step, like influencing a genetic material that would be passed on, for example, is a rather extreme point, that these are then these questions where we as scientists have to have, in my opinion, oversight, or at least a really strongly held discussion about how far should this be taken and what are the consequences of that. Because as mentioned, a point of no return, well, similar as Enrique mentioned, the moment we got phones, everything changed in a way, because we had access to information at the tips of our fingers immediately.
Thanks. Amy, could or should art enlighten us also in this ethical perspective when we look at science?
So this is something I'm questioning. I feel like the role of art is to provoke good questions, or provoke strong questions. And this is a question that I ask in almost all of my artwork is, as we're working with nature, what can we learn from it? And is tampering with nature in this way wise? So when I think about regenerative medicine, I really think about organs and replacement parts. One of my pieces, The Heart of Evolution, is directly questioning this, because I'm looking at, if we were to replace our heart, how would this impact us? Because the heart is not only a vital organ, it's also the seat of emotional consciousness. Like, it's an organ that we relate to love, joy, pain, and sorrow. So if we start changing out these parts, who do we then become? I have a close friend, Lisa, who had a lung transplant. And when she was recovering, I went to the transplant house and stayed with her for a while. And everyone I spoke to there talked about this experience of feeling totally different from having this transplant, if they were religious or spiritual or not. They all felt something. They said they felt like a new person. They could feel somebody else like inside of them. And it was almost indescribable of how this changed them. It's also this big spiritual journey. Even if you don't call it spiritual, there's some kind of emotional maturation or a different process of looking at oneself. So I'm questioning who we could become when we start to make these modifications, both in, dangers and potentials. A lot of times these potentials will happen because we want to make people healthier. We want to make replacement parts. They would first probably go to people who need transplants, and then for life extension. So at what point do we draw that line? What ethical questions come up in that process? Things like, if now we can replace our parts and have a very prolonged life to 300 years, or even, an immortal life, then what are rights to death? Who chooses to be able to live that long? Is it only people who are wealthy? Is it people who can afford it? Is it like, how does society choose who gets to live that long? And then how do also people choose who will be able to die? So these are really big issues that come up in this process. And although this is not what we're facing right now, we can see a future where these questions are being raised. So I'm asking those questions with all of my work. And then also I'm using the actual technology that the scientists are using and the technologists are using to help us develop those parts. So with the Heart of Evolution, I'm working on 3D printing vasculature, because if we can successfully 3D print vasculature, we are a step closer to 3D printing viable organs where we can deliver blood and nutrients. I'm also working on, different proposed models for the heart that wouldn't have as many, that if there was a blockage, we could bypass that blockage. So I worked with cardiac surgeons on that piece to understand what a better design would be. So I'm looking at both, right? The paths and the strategies for improvement, but also the dangers and the ethical issues that we have to ask in the process. And working through it is when these questions come up. I know, I have a feeling Enrique has a lot to say about this as well. So I want to include him in this question.
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yeah, actually, it's very interesting because some of these questions, actually, I always had them somehow on my mind, but really never started properly thinking until actually I discussed with Amy, and she kind of triggered for me this, to think on this. So actually, this thing of, she mentioned, how much of you is left every time you would switch a body part, or every time you would change a part of you. Who are you? Because at the end, that would be, let's say, more the philosophical question in the background. Who are you? And how much can you replace while you're still you, right? I mean, at the end, we also have to understand that although we think that we're always the same person, let's say at least chemically, physically, this is something that actually changes over time. Our skeleton, for example, changes completely every 7 years. Every 7 years, we get a complete new skeleton on our bodies. All our skin, all our innards, all our organs, actually they're continuously replaced every time we eat food, or when we grow, or when we do exercise. All the material that we're composed of is continuously changing. So actually, it's not a certain thing, material, flesh that makes us a person, but it's actually something else. And when we see like changing, for example, a hand, changing an ear, changing an eye, is that something that is really affect who I am? Because even who are you, your brain, your thoughts, they also change over time. You're not the same person as you were 20 years ago. You have also completely evolved. So yeah, I think that really touches a lot of the philosophical questions of, at the end, who are we? But yeah, I think at least for the future, and also how Amy foresees the future of medicine, of this, yeah, we will be able to get body replacement parts. I think that really will not change how we are. But yeah, it really opens this question of, but then who we really are. And I think, yeah, that's something that should really be explored also from different perspectives and different areas of knowledge.
Okay, yeah, so the possibilities of regenerative medicine are enormous, I think. Roberto, if you look at the current research now and the questions from society and from innovation, how do you think the field of regenerative medicine will develop in the future? What can we expect?
If I think of the relatively near future, I can think of regenerative medicine that is personalized, that is patient-specific in a way. We are all different if you look at into a very specific level. We are what we are because of the information that is contained in our cells. And every one of us has a tiny different set of these informations. And this means that we are able to process information and to regenerate also part of our body in slightly different ways. And finding a personalized way in which we can treat our body and our tissues and stimulate our cells to do the job, I think that can be one of the future directions to take.
And on the longer term?
Yeah, on the long term, I can probably envision a world in which if we need to replace a part of our body, we will have a specific personalized scaffold or biomaterials with a specific personalized stimuli that we know that are necessary for each part of our body. And by simply combining the two in the right formula and put it back into the patients, we are able to trigger naturally the regenerative process for each of the organs in our body.
Thanks. And Amy, as an artist, what kind of applications or insight would you like to receive from regenerative medicine for your work? What are the things you would like to order from the labs in the near and longer future?
Well, my first question is, what is the smartest thing to make in this way? How should we redesign our bodies and use regenerative medicine and synthetic biology to make our bodies and our lives, our environment, a better place? So for me, I don't know those answers yet, so I don't know what to necessarily order. But the importance of having these kinds of conversations that we're having and start to ask across many different platforms, scientists, artists, philosophers, political systems as well. How are we going to use this biotechnology to create a better future and a healthier future, even a more enlightened future? Because we really haven't totally used our technology in that way. We have the potential to use our science and technology for that, and there are those positive applications, but I think overall as a society we have to ask those bigger questions first. Then we can place our order once we know where we want to go.
I think that is a beautiful answer, and in fact, it is. You're pointing also out what the mission of Science Gallery is, Science Gallery International, but also the science galleries in the world. For opening up this dialogue between society, art, and science, and discuss possibilities. And we have had some very engaging workshops with young people from 15 to 25 years old, listening to scientists and listening to artists, and then being able to ask very, very good questions So this means that they understand the possibilities and the implications very well, but then start sorting out the ethical, the practical, the innovation possibilities of what they've heard. So thanks for your very good answer. It means that your art is in the very right place at the exhibition of Science Gallery. Okay, I would like to thank you all, but I think we somehow made a full circle. Thanks again then. Have a nice evening. Have a nice day in the US.
Keep me in the loop for with Science Gallery Rotterdam. I'm happy to work with you, and definitely happy to work with the team again too. I love Rotterdam, so we haven't been traveling, but when I'm there, I will come see you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Bye bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.